and see what we do have inside this museum. This is our Historical Society logo. You notice the old bridge, Coles Bridge, the boll weevil, the helicopter, and the peanut. Right, now museum worker who carries people on tours through the museum. Mr. Bowden, go ahead and begin your comments.
Welcome to our museum. We're presently in one of the waiting rooms. The museum has 2 waiting rooms, which is a carryover of the days of segregation. We have 2 restrooms in the white waiting room part and 2 over in the colored waiting room part. The door that you can see in the back did not exist in the days of segregation.
Right.
Note the ticket window, and there is also a ticket window over in the colored side.
Right. Now here we have something on the Indians here, Buck.
This is a very good resume of the Creek Indians, which inherited this part of the world for many, many years. The Indians done pretty good down at their battle in Fort Mims near Mobile. But when they regrouped and got into another battle up near Talladega, the Battle of Big Bend, Andy Jackson come down to show the settlers how to fight, and that was just about the Indians down, end of the Indians down in our part of the country. Also notice the height of this room. It was very common for our southern houses to have the high doors. Wood for heat was very, very cheap. The farmers would cut the wood, bring it into the town, sell it to the city folks to get a little bit of income during the winter time. Room, of which we're using for our medical historical events or exhibits. This is a real old wheelchair. Here we have Dr. Gibson's executive chair, Dr. Gibson being one of the more prominent doctors in the forming days of Enterprise. Here we have a doctor's library. Keep in mind that when you go see a doctor and he does not know what's wrong with you, that if he turned around to get a book, you would think that he didn't know what he was doing. So what he would do is give you something to ease the pain and tell you to come back tomorrow. And as soon as you walked out the door, he'd reach behind him in his library and get a book and look it up and see what was wrong with you, or else call one of his buddies. This relatively old examining table, drawers over on the side of it for the examining instruments. This octopus-looking device was the operating room light. We had several mirrors around it. The light was in the center. The reason for the mirrors is so that as the doctor was operating, he would not have a shadow on what he was doing. Here we have an old hospital baby bed, goes back many, many years. This is a residue from one of the local pharmacies when the doctor would write his prescription and the guy at the drugstore actually mixed up the various chemicals to make the medicine. The little handy packs here, as I remember seeing them, was what a doctor carried in his bag so that when he made a house call and you needed some medicine real quick, that he could give you a little bit until someone could go to the drugstore and get what the doctor ordered. This is an operating table, and we have here 2 pictures of Dr. Massey and Dr. Treadwell, both very prominent citizens of Enterprise in our older days.
That's Dr. Treadwell, I believe, right there. Dr. Massey.
We're now in the depot agent's office. when you are observing the layout of the depot, remember that the railroad came through here in 1898. This depot building, most of it was built in 1903. It was added to in about 1916. Highway 84 through Coffee County was not paved until 1939. So just about all of the comings and goings of the city rotated around the depot. The depot agent wore many, many hats. Not only did he sell tickets, but he was the Western Union man, which meant that any messages going out of town or coming in came through the depot. And he was the Railway Express man, which done in the older days what UPS is doing today. That is shipping small packages rapidly. He also handled a lot of less carload freight, which was material that was coming into stores that was not of high value and could be handled slowly. And then, of course, we had a lot of carloads of freight. So all of the activity of outside of the community came through the depot one way or the other. The folks running up and down the streets with nothing to do, sitting around talking, would hear the train engine whistles blowing coming into town, and they'd come down to see who was coming and going. The most trains that we ever had through here was 4 a day. Now the branch line coming through Enterprise comes off of the Montgomery-Dothan main line, which in the older days was a part of a main line from Chicago to Birmingham, Montgomery, on out to Waycross, Georgia, and Jacksonville, Florida. So of the 4 trains, what it was is one would come through going down to Elba, about 16 miles down the road. It would be re-coaled, re-watered, and would make the run back to Dothan. And then, of course, there would be another train in the afternoon. So this finally, as traffic went down, roads was paved, bus systems came in, telephones came in, and the functions of the depot just gradually died off one by one. And today, the Historical Society owns this depot building because the railroad company could not justify owning this big building in downtown, paying the taxes on it, trying to heat it, etc., etc. So they made a bargain with the Pea River Historical Society that if they would build them a small cinder block building on their property on the outskirts of town, that they would give them this depot. So this is the reason we've got it, and as in the case of all museums, they are never complete, in that all time is positive.
Thank you, Buck. That's very good. Would you identify those 2 pictures up there for people?
This is Mr. John Henry Carmichael, and this is his wife. John Henry Carmichael is considered to be the founder of the city of Enterprise. Enterprise itself is kind of a Johnny-come-lately town. When this part of the country was being settled, most of your little towns sprang up where the roads forked or where they crossed the river. This would explain the now barren town of Clintonville, and also the towns of Elba and Geneva. That was made in 1976, paid for by the citizens of the community with donations to help us make a museum out of the depot. You can look at this in another way, is that if you'd give us $10, we'll put your name on the quilt and you can go on an ego trip. What better deal can you get? Here we have one of the first mimeograph machines that came out. There's been much advancements made on them. This is a set of type for putting in this, for making posters where the paper was put in it or inked and run over, and the posters was made one at a time. And in behind we have a real old addressograph machine About the same thing that the Army used to make dog tags out of. It impressed a letter into a little metal tag. And this got away from lots of handwriting. The organ was very, very popular down in this part of the world. In my travels, I noticed that west of the Mississippi, that pianos were much more popular than organs. I don't have the exact price on the end of my tongue, but I have seen some old Sears Roebuck catalogs with the prices in them, and these organs were very, very cheap. This is Dr. George Washington Carver, who was the founder of Tuskegee Institute and done a tremendous amount of work with peanuts in association with Booker T. Washington.
Let's start over. But it's on lease to us.
All right.
Go ahead.
This is the bell from the old Clintonville schoolhouse. When the schoolhouse was torn down quite a few years ago, the bell was sent up to the State Archives in Montgomery. And when the Historical Society got a hold of the depot and learned that the bell was up there, we were able to get it back on permanent loan. We will see a picture of the old Clintonville schoolhouse in just a few minutes.
Thank you, Bub.
These pictures were painted by some students out at the Enterprise State Junior College. They did exercise their right to change it, as many, many artists do. The white building we see here is the old Clintonville schoolhouse. Very, very significant in its design. Notice that it had big windows to help keep it cool, let in a lot of light. There was 8 classrooms, one on each corner of each floor. The principal's office was usually in the middle, and the staircase was in the middle of the bottom part. Here we have the first movie machine that came to town. This is just the mechanical part of it. There was a big film magazine on top, one under the bottom, and a large size arc light. When movies first came in, they would show one reel about 15 or 20 minutes, then they'd shut down, turn on the lights, the operator would change the reel, and then we'd start it up again. It was very, very popular in the rural communities of Coffee County that a fellow would have a movie machine at different schoolhouses, and he would rent a film, and he would show it at one schoolhouse on Monday night, the next schoolhouse on Tuesday night, next one on Wednesday night, and so forth. Very, very popular. This is our collection of old office machines, and before anybody asks, yes, they were inspected by the FBI. This is a real old chifforobe, very popular in its days. Back before World War II, if a family had a cedar bedroom set, that is a bed, a cedar chest, and a chifforobe, that was about the top of the line. I understand from a lot of military wives that come through our museum that these are very popular over in Germany, in that their taxing structure is based on the number of rooms in a house, and a closet is considered to be a room. And as a result, they don't have any closets, they have chifforobes.
That's interesting, Buff.
This is a World War I uniform. I think that is the uniform of Mr. Grover Grubbs, who was a very prominent citizen of the town. Back here in the, I'm going to say the addition to the depot, business was so good in around 1916 that they had to add this section to it, which is about 50 foot by 50 foot. But anyway, here's our old farming paraphernalia, and this was a syrup pan. After the juice was squeezed, it was used for cotton and peanuts.
Mr. Biden, there's an old pitcher pump there back in the back. A lot of people may not be familiar with.
That's an exhibit. We had to pick this after it grew up. As you can see the bowl here, this one didn't quite mature, but what the boll weevil was doing was puncturing this bowl and also puncturing the little bloom. But as the cotton did grow, it would open up, and then we would have to get our cotton sacks, put them on, and then we could crawl through the fields and pick the cotton and put it in the sack. Now, once the cotton got into the sack, it was a very interesting plant. We have here the cotton, and what the gin does is take the lint off of the cotton. Then the cotton is spread out and twisted and made into thread, and this is what our cotton clothes are made out of. Then we take the seed, and many years ago the little fibers on that were called linters, and that was used for gun cotton. Then we had a machine that would take the hull off the cotton seed, and then inside the seed we could press it and get the oil out of it, and the residue was ground up into cottonseed meal, which was a very high protein cattle feed, and also the hull was used for roughage in cattle.
The cotton is coming back today down our way.
Grist mill. And we were very fortunate to get the handling equipment that went with it. The bigger stone was the top one, and of course the smaller one was the bottom. And farmers had to go to mill about every 2 weeks. This meant that they had to be mills close by. And this accounts for the fact that we have got many, many creeks down here in this part of the country that is somebody's mill creek. We got Buck's Mill Creek, we got Harper's Mill Creek, and you can go on and on and on with mill creeks. But usually the miller run a store on the side, or there was a store close by. And when the farmer shelled his corn, took it to mill, the miller would take a part of the meal as his feed. This was referred to as a toll. Then the miller would take what he had collected and bring it into town and sell it to the merchants, and this is where the city folks got their cornmeal.
Mr. Biden, my great-great-grandfather had an old mill, grist mill, up on Judy Creek at Skipperville in the late 1800s, 1820s, and it's not in existence now.
There is one grist mill still in operation in Coffee County up in the extreme northeast. I don't think it operates continuously, but it is an operable mill. I think it's old Presswood's Mill.
Right. Someone else owns it now, but it is operating, and I got some meal from it long ago.
One of the first tractors that came into this part of the world, note that it has the name Fordson on it, made by the Ford Motor Company. I read an article one time as the reason he didn't call this a Ford is that somebody else was already making tractors called a Ford, so he just went ahead and called his a Fordson. These were very, very popular. From looking at the engine, it's nothing but an oversized Model T engine, and if any of our listeners know what we're talking about, it had the old spark coils in it.
Magnetic.
These things can still be bought on the market today.
Okay.
Look at that thing, Clayton.
Hmm?
Look at that.
It's heavy, I know. Okay.
This is our little collection of farm equipment. Generally, a farmer with one mule could handle 40 acres. He would plant 20 acres with something to sell and 20 acres for stuff for his family and his animals. This planter was made up in North Carolina, called a coal planter, would plant just about anything except cotton. And for some reason, we have still not been able to come up with a cotton planter. But this could plant corn, peanuts, soybeans, and as I indicated, just about everything but cotton. Some of the other smaller plows, the wooden hopper on this was a guiana strower. Guiana was a fertilizer, very heavy, and it could be put in the hopper, and there was some knobs on the back wheel that as it was towed through the field by the mule, it would go thump, 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 and drop out a little bit of fertilizer that went through the field. One of the biggest mysteries in my mind back in my childhood days was why in the world they put fertilizer in 200-pound sacks. And people have been known to tell falsehoods, and I have heard some individuals say that they could put a 200-pound sack of guiana under each arm and walk across the plowed field with it. Round over here we have one of the circuit breakers on the first electric power plant that came to town. It was a diesel-driven unit, very crude equipment in relation to what we got today, but it done its job. We have a pretty good bottle collection. Soft drinks have always been popular in the South, and with no paved roads, it was complicated for trucks to deliver the drinks, so every city had one. And here is 2 bottles of the plants that were located here in Enterprise.
Thank you, Miss Bowden.
Big freight warehouse of the depot. Some of the better exhibits is some cloth shoes made out of canvas. There was a factory here in Enterprise that was making these shoes. The farmer could not afford to buy the leather shoes commonly referred to as brogans, but the dirt was so hot during the summer that he could not walk on it. So there was an entrepreneur proceeded to make our shoes. We do have a documented history of that if anyone is interested in seeing it. Here we have some wood boxes. What they represent is how material was transferred before the days of cardboard and paper sacks. An old corn sheller, very fine needlework, real good collection of older style milk bottles. Getting to the point, hadn't too many people seen that kind of milk bottle, where the dairy man would leave a few of them on your doorstep every other day. Sausage stuffers, milk churns, that's where we got our butter and buttermilk. All right. This came out of the Coffee County Courthouse, and as I understand it, everybody got a fair trial before they hung them. A good exhibit here of ladies' hats of the older days, and right above it is some of the spectacles. Of the labor-intensive job of harvesting peanuts. The farmer had to go through, plow them up, then, whereas in picking cotton you could kneel down and crawl along the rows, in peanuts you had to pick them up, shake them, and put them in small piles. Well, during the summer, the farmer would cut his stack poles, and then he also cut slats, which were 2 pieces of wood about 4 foot long, maybe 4 inches wide and a ½ inch thick, to hold the peanuts up off the ground. So once they were plowed up, shaped, put in small piles, they had to go back to the barn, get the stack poles and the slats, come out through the field, throw off 2 slats and 1 stack pole about every 25 or 30 feet. Then some guy had to go through, dig his hole, put his stack pole in it, nail the slats to it. Then the other guy come through with his pitchfork and pile the peanuts up on the stack. Now, after we got our complete stack built, they would stay there for a little while, and by the way, the purpose of the slat was to allow air to come underneath this and go up through the stack to dry the peanuts. Then they would come out with a sled pulled by 2 mules and actually pick up the sled, put it upside the stack, push the peanuts down from the top where they could get to the pole, put a chain around it, pull it over, and drag it into the peanut picker. You'd never believe it if I told you how much labor was involved around one of these peanut pickers.
There's a wildcat there, Buck.
Yeah, this is a couple of our local citizens. If you drop down just a little bit, you can see one, I guess he's about 5.5 foot long.
One of them diamondbacks. This is part of your interest here, Mr. Biden.
Yes, the older electronic stuff was being thrown out, and the local amateur radio society decided that if the depot would provide us some space, that we would start gathering up some of this stuff. And one of the more interesting exhibits that we have, this was a World War II aircraft radio receiver, and it was wired by hand. We also have some bigger vacuum tubes that were used in transmitters, and these probably are still being used today. This is your old household radios, many of them, and we're very fortunate to have an old teletype machine. If there was ever a dinosaur, this was it. This has been replaced with something you can nearly hold in your hand. This is one of the first commercial radio receivers that came on the market, made by RCA. This is a speaker that went with some of the older battery-powered radios. We have one of Mr. Thomas Edison's first commercial phonographs. It had, or the record was a cylinder. And we've got quite a few of them on display.
This Demijohn, the bootleggers use some of them too, didn't they, Buck?
Yeah, these are mostly used today for bringing in water. We do have a water truck running around town. They're very popular down in South Florida where there's a lot of sulfur in the water. One of the old wringer-type washing machines here. And of our kitchen equipment, I think the one that people enjoy the most is a waffle iron, where on the old cast iron stoves you could take the eye off of it and lift that up, pour in your waffle batter, cook one side of it, turn it over, cook the other side of it for a while, and then take it out.
That's it.
Very ingenious little device. Notice that most of the cooking equipment in the old days was cast iron, most of it made up around Birmingham. And I might add that I learned in school that Birmingham, Alabama is the only place in the world that all 3 items, coal, iron, and limestone, for making steel, exist in the same general area. Old sewing machine. One of the first refrigerators that came into this part of the world. That's a Frigidaire. One of the first electric stoves. In behind that we have a Scuppernong crusher. Scuppernongs are very popular in this part of the world, but the seeds are bitter.
And when you are making or getting the scuppernong juice to make either wine or jellies out of, you don't want to break the seeds. So this has a roller down in one end of it that'll break the scuppernong, but not the seed. I'd also like to point out that this bottom board is one solid board. To give you an idea of how big the tree was that board came out of, I would estimate that thing to be about 15, 16 inches wide. One of the first electric stoves in this part of the world. The old popular kid stools, made out of a slab with some holes bored in it, a few legs, and I believe they call that thing a mangle. It was used for ironing flat stuff, sheets, pillowcases, towels, etc.
Right. Thank you, Buck. I want to get another shot or two of...
And if you think you got it good today, let it run through your mind of what this fellow was going through about 50 years ago.
Thank you, Mr. Biden. You've done a good job carrying us through the museum, and I hope others will enjoy looking at our tape.
Before we leave our Depot Museum, I'd like to take a look at our Indian arrowhead and Indian lure collection. As I understand it, all the arrowheads in this case were found in the immediate area. I personally do not know where any arrowheads have been found in Coffee County, but many of them have some old pottery, arrowheads, the slings for arrows, and the two stones that the Indian maidens used to grind their corn into meal. And on the subject of corn, I have heard the term hoe cake used many times, and I recently learned why the cornmeal that we cook into hoe cakes was called as such. That the slaves would take water, salt, and meal into the field with them when they would go out, and when it come noontime, they would take the hoes, build a little fire, and use the bottom of the hoe, if you will, for a pan to mix up their cornmeal and water and put it on there to cook it. I thought that was a very interesting story.
That is very interesting, Mr. Biden, and thank you again. We were about to forget this little exhibit that a lot of people will be interested in seeing. I might add that there are a lot of places in Coffee County that arrowheads can be found. A lot of them have been found out on the site where the Enterprise Junior College is now. Thank you again.